Hi, everyone. My name is Laurel Allen with the California Academy of Sciences, and thank you so much for deciding to watch this today. I'm so sorry that I'm not presenting this live, but just FYI, I've put my contact info at the end, and if I say anything interesting enough during this 30 minutes to make you want to talk about it or ask about it later, I'd really love to connect, so please don't hesitate. Okay, I'm going to grab my slides here, and today I'm going to be talking about using social media for meaningful science communication. It probably isn't a surprise to hear that I can't teach anyone to do that in 30 minutes, but what I can do and what I'm going to try to do is just help you think about social media a little bit differently, to really take a step back and think about what it takes to do well, what the benefits of that are, and what you should be thinking about if you want to take it further and incorporate it into your career in some way, whether it's communication itself as a career or whether it's as a complement to a science career. So agenda-wise, I've got why museums and scientists care about social, why you could or should or really could, because it's really only if you want, and it's certainly not for everyone. The hallmarks of good social, so 3 principles that I find useful when trying to differentiate between what makes social good or bad. And then survey results for social media and emerging scientists, which is a project that I started pre-pandemic. The more kind of conferences I went to and people that I spoke with, the more interested I started to get in the questions that emerging scientists were asking and how those questions were different from the ones I got asked a lot by established scientists. So this survey was a first step in trying to understand what the needs of emerging scientists were specific to social sci-comm and how I could kind of help with that. So it's still early, it's by no means done, but I'll share some early findings from that. And then we'll take a look at the kind of questions that are floating to the top for a lot of undergrads and grads and postdocs and anyone in between. And then talk briefly about next steps in terms of things that are useful to think about if you do want to dive in deeper. So I like to start with a life is weird slide every time I talk publicly, because I'm a big believer in the idea that there are 1,000,001 ways to get everywhere that you're interested in being, and the more of them you explore, the better set up you are by the time you arrive. So I thought I wanted to do ballet for a long time. I worked really hard in high school and all the years before to performing arts school to study that. When I got to college, I realized I really wanted to write. I declared an English major with a minor in creative writing and Eastern European literature, because why not? After college, I worked for a series of alternative news weeklies and tried to become a better journalist. And then I got tired of being really, really broke, and I took a job with a glossy monthly magazine that allowed me to cover motorcycle racing internationally, so traveling around and doing a bunch of crazy stuff. When I moved to San Francisco, I took a job with a marketing agency, but one that was rooted in cultural research. So it was intellectually really interesting, and it taught me a lot of important lessons about how to think about messaging and the people on the other end of that. But my love throughout all of that, the thing that I never kind of moved away from or lost any fascination with, was science and nature. And so I started trying to do some longer form writing about that, which is the group of stuff on the right. And then got really, really interested in how digital platforms could take that further in terms of actually connecting with audiences. So today, I run digital efforts for the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, and my team's primary responsibility is a social community of about 3 million people. That is nested in 4 brands, 4 sub-brands. There's the Academy itself. There's Nightlife, which is our 21 and over series at night, Thursday nights, as the name implies. Big Picture, which is a international photo competition, and Biographic, which is an online magazine. In addition to the kind of day-to-day social, we are always on the lookout for projects with potential big digital impact. And that can mean anything from collaborating with a digital font foundry to create fonts based on collections labels, and that project is actually coming out later this year, and it's really cool. To surfacing 3D images of our collections, to doing projects with AR and VR lenses, etc. It can really be anything. The criteria is, does it make us and our work more accessible, and does it offer something that people might incorporate into their everyday lives? And then the last thing, which is really woven into everything else we do, but that we like to call out, is direct support for scientists and sciences. So that can mean everything from in-the-field expedition coverage, kind of turning that into a follow-along adventure that lets people interact directly with scientists, to trainings, which I do a lot of, to broader impact support for competitive grants. And if you can hear a lawnmower out there right now, I'm really sorry. And then just some quick highlights from current work or stuff that we've been doing since closure. We're working really hard to try to keep the physical wonder of the Academy real. That means everything from heavy promotion of live webcams and related apps to just a lot of behind the scenes features with our animals and the biologists, the critical staff who are still working to care for them during this time. And then a lot of programs with scientists allowing the public to directly interact with them. Demonstrating that we live in the same world as our followers, which is something that we always try to do, but is more important than ever right now, because doing that really means thinking about offerings that deliver things the audience genuinely needs. And these days, that's everything from information and resources to just comfort and delight. So the examples that I have on this page are just like redoing a curation of our YouTube page to offer resources that actually are useful right now, not just entertaining. Getting people like our Chief of Science, Dr. Shannon Bennett, who happens to be a virologist, on Reddit AMAs so that they're really accessible, coloring pages, you name it. We've also been doing a lot of re-examination of the kind of content we create. So we're seeing a lot of appetite for longer programs, specifically live streams, the kind of connection that people are missing from their day-to-day lives, that we can recreate to some extent online. So we have a bunch of new series popping up that have been really successful and a lot of fun to do. So check out our nightlife offerings on Thursday nights or our breakfast club sessions with scientists on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Okay, so all of that is great, but why does a museum actually invest in digital engagement teams these days? Which is, like as most of you probably know, pretty much the norm at this point. You'd be hard pressed to find a museum that didn't have a team like that. And they're all different sizes. Mine is myself and one other person, and we crank. Other people are trying to do it as a part-time job. Other people have a really robust team. It varies a lot, but the need for connection and direct connection with audiences is the same everywhere. So the three areas that DE really delivers on for museums, for anyone: revenue. We generate just over $500,000 every year, or last fiscal year. Mostly through paid social efforts that target people admission drives, essentially. Reputation, we drove in the last year nearly 3 million clicks to calacademy.org alone. And reach, which is really the most important metric. And I'll say reach itself, which is a metric, is not really what we're talking about there. What we're talking about are direct engagement. So last fiscal year, my team generated 19.3 million direct engagements with audiences around the world. And what that means, direct engagements, what that means is that something that we posted mattered enough to the person who read it to make them take an action. So whether that's commenting or retweeting or sharing or liking, that's the metric that we care most about. That's what we think tells us most accurately whether we're doing a good job of being compelling. So that's a museum. What about you? Why might you do it? These are the reasons that float to the top when you ask scientists who have robust social presence why they bother to put in the time. Build network, connect with others in your field, follow discussions and news about relevant research, promote your research or findings to colleagues and the general public, fill the public space with scientific expertise, i.e. displace misinformation, improve your chances of getting a job, being recruited, added to panels, improve your competitiveness for grants. Those two are really interesting, and they are ones we've seen more and more over the past couple of years from scientists who believe that their robust, social presence actually made a difference in differentiating them from other candidates, finding collaborators and partners, and attracting press and media attention. At the Academy, we have a really hardworking communications team that does a great job of pitching, but a lot of the press inquiries that we get come from reporters who have seen something on our social channels. Okay, so those are all really, really good reasons, but first a caveat before we dive into how, and it's that you don't have to. This is the first thing I tell everyone that I train, no matter what level they're at. If you don't want to take the time to do social media well, it's absolutely fine. It's a lot of time. It's an actual part of an actual job, generally. And it's okay if you don't want to invest in what it takes to do that well. But if you don't want to, it's pretty important to just step away and not try to do a halfway okay job of it, because bad social media can actually be really detrimental to your work, to your reputation, to your partnerships. it's pretty easy for it to make you look out of touch, or not collaborative, or even not particularly bright if it's done really poorly. So if you're not interested in doing it, totally fine. Just leave it to the organization or an employer or an institution to do that kind of communicating for you. Okay, but assuming you are a little bit interested in social sci-comm, one of the things that I find most interesting when talking with people is just to take a step back, like all the way back, and just look very simply at what's actually happening interaction-wise when you, for example, tweet at someone. And I'm going to use that by using nothing, or I'm going to demonstrate that by using nothing but Rick and Morty GIFs, which you will either really appreciate or really not appreciate. So when I talk about social, I say to imagine a busy street, because that's truly what it is. You have a bunch of people and they're walking down the street and they're there for all kinds of reasons, and they're looking at all different things and they're interested in all different things. And what you're doing as someone who puts a social message out there is asking them to stop looking at everything else and just look at you. And when you do that, the stakes are actually pretty high, because one of two things will happen. That person will either feel something and be glad that they stopped and took time to read what you said, or they will feel nothing. And what's important about that is that with each tweet or post or whatever, you're really teaching someone what to expect from you as a communicator going forward. The effect of that, whether it's good or bad, will persist beyond just that one tweet. The next time you walk up to someone and you say, "Stop and pay attention to me," they're going to remember that they've seen you before, and they're going to feel one of two things. They're either going to be excited to hear more from you because the last thing you said was worth their time, or they're going to be totally nonplussed and just be sort of annoyed and roll right past you. And if that doesn't sound particularly important or profound or whatever, I get it. But it's useful at this point to think about how you yourself consume social. So if you have a friend, no matter how much you like them in real life, if they're boring on social, you are not going to spend any time looking at them. And it gets harder and harder for them to change their mind the more and more they solidify their reputation as being boring. Like, you probably have friends, and when you see their Instagram stories, you just watch the first panel so that they can tell you watched it, but you probably won't watch the whole thing. And that's exactly what people are going to do to you as a communicator. You're building a reputation with every tweet or posts, and you really want to take advantage of the fact that human brains are wired to go back to things that we found rewarding the first time and to skip over things that we didn't. So the first thing I really want to bake in is respect your audience. With each post, consider what you can give them that's worth their time. And then the second rule, again, sounds really simple and really silly, but it's act like a human. The number one mistake that I see people make on social when they sit down at the keyboard is they suddenly start imagining themselves as some sort of marketer. They think about what they want to sell, or how they can make people do or think what they want. And their languages and their behaviors get really, really weird. They get really formal, or they get really cheesy, or they just get really cringeworthy. But essentially they end up talking to people in ways that they would never do in real life. And the people on the receiving end feel that. So let's look at the power of just being human for a second in terms of making you feel anything. Would you rather learn more about this guy or this guy? Would you rather hang out with this man or this one who brings his dog to his official NASA portrait session? And let's stay with space for a second. If you were going to ask someone questions about life on the International Space Station, would you ask her or her? So, okay, you may be thinking like, yeah, okay, humans like funny things, big deal. But what's actually funny is that this stuff is not funny at all. It's not even like amusing for more than a split second, especially when you consider the vast amount of content online that is legitimately hilarious. What these moments are is human. They're just surprisingly human moments. And being human doesn't mean that you have to be funny. It can just mean that you're very warm and visibly in love with your work. It could mean that you're enthusiastically nerdy. What matters, probably more than anything else I can think of, if you want to do social media successfully and make science feel relevant, is that you simply never forget to be human, to talk like a human, act like a human, embrace your curiosity, embrace the fact that you don't always know the answers. Because human is what people will remember and relate to and want more of. And that's what inspires people to care and to see themselves in your work. And I want to show you just how simple and powerful a tiny, tiny bit of humanity can be. I'm going to read you 2 tweets and tell me which one leaves you more excited. The first one, the Collier Lab is pleased to announce the discovery of a new technique for analysis. The second one, something incredible just happened at the Collier Lab. Hopefully you said 2. And there's a reason that I had so many astronauts in that previous lineup, and it's because space is a really good example of something that is crazy hard to talk about. It's inaccessible, it's complicated, it's literally very, very far away from anything that any of us will experience. And so NASA has this tendency to build separate personas and accounts for pretty much all of their spacecraft, because they know that it's critical to getting people to care and to getting people to invest in these journeys and to invest in the organization itself. And it's funny because like building personas for inanimate objects might seem weird, but it's actually way weirder to ask humans on this channel that was designed to facilitate human interaction to care about something that's not human. So we have respect your audience, act like a human. And the awesome thing about acting like a human is that you know how to do it. You just have to let yourself. Use yourself as a litmus test for getting this right. When you're about to tweet something, just stop and say, is this interesting enough that I would actually stop and read this? Like, do I actually care about this? And if the answer is no, then try it again, because no one else will either. And if it's not, then it's not really respecting their time and it's not helping you ultimately. And then the third, I'm going to give you 3 right now too. Make your writing matter, take time to shape your message, and take time to proof it. It sounds really silly, but people often think that the writing doesn't matter. They're just so eager to tell people something that they don't look at it. And the reality is writing and language like that, making that smooth and making that clean is how you get someone to join you in understanding whatever it is you're trying to say. If it's messy, if it's sloppy, if it has errors, that's going to get between them and them actually hearing you. So yeah, just make it clean. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the results of this survey. I have about 300 responses right now, so it's still small and again, early. But in terms of who's responded so far, 60% have been undergraduates, 37% have been graduates, and 74% of them said that they were active daily on social, 23% define themselves as frequent users, which is several times a week, and 3% said they have personal accounts but rarely use them. Obviously, it's kind of self-selecting. People interested in social media are way more likely to take a social media survey. But here's what we know so far. So platform preferences were pretty interesting. Overall, 52.6% said Twitter first, 47.4% ranked Instagram as a favorite, and the remaining 24% was a pretty even breakdown of Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Reddit, YouTube, TikTok, etc. But what is really interesting about platform preference is, and this doesn't seem profound, like you probably know this instinctively, but seeing it mapped out was interesting. Undergraduates largely prefer Instagram, which is that lighter color, and then grad students, so just a year later or shortly after, not a huge jump, but suddenly they overwhelmingly prefer Twitter. And that's because people move to Twitter when they have more to say. And so we know that platforms will evolve as you do. They'll obviously evolve in the overall landscape as well. And another thing that we wanted to understand, and when we say we, it's just me right now, but that I wanted to understand, is just how people think about the value of social media relative to their careers. So I asked, do you currently use social media to talk about science? 67% of the respondents said yes. And from the yes group, 57% said that they post a mix of science and non-science content. 33% said no, but of those, 56% were interested in doing so. They just weren't totally sure how to get started. And then the second section says, if you said yes, what statement best describes you? 25% said that they wanted their social sci-comm to be a focus of their career, or wanted sci-comm to be a focus of their career, sorry. And 75% said that they wanted sci-comm to support their career. So 75% of those people, they're not trying to be science communicators, but they do see a social sci-comm presence as really key to a successful career in science overall. So usage trends for the how, and these are ranked kind of in order of percentage with the highest at the top. Passive monitoring was the largest use. Totally makes sense. That's how most of us actually use social, whether we know it or not. You're mostly kind of scrolling and seeing what's interested. Messaging was second. Third was posting, so actively going ahead and posting messages. looking for conversations to join, and then a pretty small fraction of people were regularly using metrics to gauge their own impact and popularity. And that doesn't just mean like noticing when something is successful. It means actually going into the analytics section to see what those metrics are. And then here are the whys, also in order. These are pretty interesting. So peer-to-peer networking, seeking out thought leaders, news info, finding potential mentors or advisors, getting attention for topics I'm passionate about, attracting followers, building a base, becoming a professional or known science communicator, having debates and discussions about specific topics. And then at the very bottom, which was interesting, keeping in touch with friends and family. So we know that that's important to everybody, whether you're in an earlier career stage or whether you're later. That's still something that everybody wants to do and thinks about social as kind of a synonymous with. But when you ask them to rank their priorities, their whys, it still ranks at the bottom. And this for me is where it got really interesting. So the first section on the left is for the platforms you use, how would you rank your overall proficiency? On the left is 1, which is novice. I use basic functions. The rest freaks me out. And on the right is expert. There's no aspect or feature that I don't understand. And you can see that this group, emerging scientists, they feel pretty confident about the functionality and about their overall proficiency. And that totally makes sense. Like, these generations are super social literate, not surprising at all. And then the second question was, if you do social sci-comm, how confident are you that you're doing it well? And this was interesting because, again, on the left, 0 confidence, help. On the right, extremely confident. You're lucky I even took this survey. And you can see the concentration shift to the left. So this is a group that is really confident about their overall proficiency. They're like, I got these platforms, I understand the functionality, whatever, but they are not confident or not as confident that they're actually doing the science communication particularly well. And what's interesting about this is if I ask these same questions to established scientists, they're flipped. So they are super aware that they're not completely platform literate. They have a lot of questions about functionality, but because they're established and they've been talking about their science for a long time, they still are confident that they're doing the social science communication well, and they're not really differentiating between sci-comm and social sci-comm. Whereas I think the emerging scientists are aware enough that the social sci-comm is a different flavor, it's a different skill set, it's a different number of things or factors that you have to think about, that they have less confidence that they're actually hitting that. So super interesting from a strategy perspective. And these are the most common questions that came up in that survey. And these are actual questions, but they speak to much larger trends. So first, what platform should I be using? And second, what kind of content should I post? Those are really the only 2 questions that also come up consistently with established scientists. The rest are pretty specific to emerging scientists. How do I separate my personal, private, and professional social media life? How do I market and account for both peer and general public audiences? How do I avoid social burnout or getting obsessive about using social professionally? How do I quiet the voice telling me my posts are useless? Is there a trick to just clicking post without a lot of wavering? And I'm seeing a typo now and it really bothers me. But anyway, hopefully, or I would suspect that a lot of those questions are relevant or familiar. And what's really interesting is that you probably actually already know the answers to a lot of these questions and are equipped to think about them strategically. When I kind of go through this deck with actual emerging scientists and we talk about these things, they're almost always able to get to their own answers. But one of the ways that you can do this on your own, if you are interested in incorporating social into like as a intentional kind of strategy tool for supporting a career in STEM, is you go through this exercise. And each one of these things, this is really a cascading exercise. So I would suggest doing it in order if you're interested, because each one will give you answers that relate to the next. So first, your goals. Whatever your goals are, they are okay. They could be just to have fun and just to connect with people, or they can actually be to talk about your science. You just need to know what they are, because once you figure out your goals, like why you actually would want to spend time in those platforms, then your audience suddenly becomes clear. So if your goals are to talk about your science or get attention for your science, then your audience includes people like media and journalists. If your goal is just networking, then it includes, colleagues and potential mentors or people that you expect to be at a conference with or things like that. One feeds into the other, though. And once you understand your actual goals and your audience, then your content scope, i.e. what you should be posting, also becomes clear. The kind of content that is really appropriate for media or getting media interested is going to be different from what you would just share with friends or what you would want a potential advisor to see. And again, mixes of all these things are also completely valid, but it's important to just have the goals and the audience defined so that you can also think about the mix as something that fits that combination as well. And then your voice. And voice is actually kind of a higher level strategy piece. Like I also teach entire workshops on voice and tone. But what's important to think about voice-wise is that in the same way you will go into a professional space, whether it's a conference room or a classroom or something, and talk about you and your work in a consistent way, it's important to do that in social as well. You don't want to come across as super schizophrenic or not particularly focused or dedicated to any one thing. People like other people who are knowable, and that comes through on digital platforms in the same way it does in the real world. And then your community behaviors. So just pushing out messages is only a very small piece of what it takes to do social well. You also genuinely have to be part of that community. And that means participating in discussions. It means rewarding other people when you find what they've said interesting or well said or important. It means giving other folks feedback in the same way that you, and networking with them in the same way that you hope they do with you. So it's important to spend time on that and budget time for that. And that brings us to bandwidth. So once you understand your goals and how you would prioritize those relative to other stuff you do, and your audience and your content, and your community behaviors, you really need to think about how much time you have to devote to this. And then that leads you to your MO, which is how are you going to get it done? If you decide that it matters, if you go through this exercise and you kind of have this stuff nailed down, how are you going to handle the bandwidth piece? Are you going to schedule a couple times a week? Are you going to set aside time a couple times a week? Once you have all of that stuff figured out, you have a really solid foundation for a cohesive social strategy that will effectively support whatever those goals are that you've defined. Yeah, super easy, see? Anyways, I hope that you have enjoyed that. I'm at 29 minutes and 38 seconds, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself. lallen@calacademy.org or LCA Inc. on Twitter. I love connecting on Twitter. I don't use my personal Twitter as much as I kind of should, just because I'm always so busy on brand channels, but I genuinely love connecting there. And yeah, I would love to meet you in that space. So thanks again. I hope that was useful, and everybody take care. Bye.